Okay, Assalamu alaikum. We'll wait a couple of minutes and then we'll start inshallah.
May I ask a
Yeah,
question?
yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
The schedule. You've confirmed the upcoming lesson with Professor Asad Q. Ahmed um in mid-January. Yeah. So is that as scheduled according to the outline of lessons?
Um, no, this is going to be outside of it. So I will deliver the session on palimpsest of themselves, which is a book by Dr. Asad. Um,
Okay. So the outline is your lessons. Okay, I see.
Yeah, it's my lesson,
Hmm.
but maybe, I mean, we'll see. But I'm definitely gonna deliver every single thing that I have laid out.
Hmm.
So, for example, I have prepared a lecture on Hidden Caliphate by Dr. Walid Ziad,
Okay.
but he's gonna join and he will talk about his upcoming monograph, which is about the female Sufi saint of Kabul.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
So,
So
yeah,
it's
so
not
you'll
just
also get access to like new ideas, you know. This is a
excellent.
good opportunity
Very good.
to
That's
understand.
brilliant. Yeah. Because he
I talked to Dr. Asad in terms of like the topic that he wants to discuss here. Um, and I mean, you guys can decide. So we have a couple of options. Either, excuse me, either he's going to explain the whole Makulat tradition, and I think he doesn't need to do that because I'm already gonna explain every single thing in the Sunday discussion as well. I'll make sure not to leave any section or like no stone unturned. He is going to publish a new book. It's going to come out in like a year or two, which is about how native Muslim scholars before colonial modernity, or the eve of let's say colonial modernity, how they understood concepts like hurriyat, azadi, and these things. So usually when you look at Muslim philosophers or poets, we focus on Iqbal, right? Or if you go to like the Arab world, there's a focus on Mahmud Darwish and others, right? Uh, so what he's doing in this new book, which started off as an article, but that expanded into a new book, um, he wants to understand how these Muslim scholars from the Khairabad and the Farangi Mahal and other traditions, how they are understanding, how they understand the ideas of freedom, right? And so that will give us a glimpse, right, of a new world. So if you guys want, we can also talk about that. I mean, Dr. Russell would love to talk about it. It's something that he's working on right now. So
fascinating. So this is very interesting. So upcoming projects. So yeah, I mean that's a possibility we can do. You will deliver the his based on his book the lecture before he delivers his lesson, whichever that be will be.
We'll see. So he's currently traveling right now, but he was kind enough to to take out time for us. And
Mm,
he's very happy. He actually, looks forward to talk to all of you,
excellent. Yeah.
and share ideas. And, he's going to ask you about the progress and etc. But we'll see. Maybe like most likely he will deliver this after I deliver the lecture on palimpsest. And believe
Okay.
me, like of all the 30 books in this course, his book Palimpsest is the one that drained me the most. Like, yeah, it really
Yeah.
tortured me. I also shared that with him. I was like, this book really tortured me.
Yeah, it's
Um,
quite dense, yeah, work.
yeah,
And did you what about Professor Walid Zia? Did you confirm with him or not yet?
yeah, he's. I mean, I'm in touch with him. He's going to come after Dr.
Mm.
Tareen. So I've emailed Dr. Tareen as well, and he's going to respond. Inshallah, he's going to respond soon. So Dr. Asad, then Dr. Tareen. Maybe then after that we can have a session with Dr. Walid Ziad, or maybe we'll have a session with Dr. Walid Ziad and then Dr. Tareen. Inshallah, we'll see.
And Dr. Tareen's what will that be on?
It's going to be on his two books, Palimpsest and Peerless Intimacies, and some general questions about, for example, what were the social conditions during the Deoband Bareli
Yeah.
contestation, etc. So, yeah, it's two books.
Does that correspond to any of the lesson you will deliver?
No, no, no,
Future
no,
lesson?
it doesn't. Yeah.
No, okay, that will be independent. Okay. And one last thing, where is Tablighi Jamaat? You didn't deliver anything on
Yeah,
Tablighi.
I'm going to integrate that in maybe like some Sunday discussion. That'll be like a special lecture on that because I've
Yeah,
also read a book on it. So I also want to prepare something on. We'll see, inshallah.
sure.
Okay. So by the way, this is actually let me correct this mistake. It's actually lecture number 8. So apologies, I messed up. Okay. Anyway,
You plan to finish in before Ramzan, yeah?
yeah, in February we'll be done with it, inshallah.
Okay.
Okay. So in this session, again, there's a lot to discuss. There's a lot to unpack here. As a source material, I have picked 3 books, and I've shared. I don't think I've uploaded them in the Google Drive as of yet, but I will. One is by Professor Christian Troll, on the theology of Sir Syed, like his new kalam, his new theology. The other book is on basically the Aligarh school, like the first generation. And then the third book, which I recently read, is well, the book is about on the Ahle Quran movement, but the first the first chapter also talks about Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, because as we'll see, Ahle Quran traces their lineage back to Sir Syed. Like Sir Syed was the person that basically influenced them a lot. So we'll see. So these are the 3 books that I've chosen for this. So there's a lot of unpack here, but I want to keep this limited as far as the general history of ulama is concerned. Okay, this is my concern here. So we won't get into, for example, his theology and how he, for example, his new ideas about hadith, right? And how he went against the traditional perspective and how ulama reacted. We won't get into that, but I'll explain his general worldview, his interaction with the British, okay, and his background, his teachers, and his parents, etc. And like the general political and social world that he found himself in. Okay, so yeah, I mean, he was born in 1817 in Delhi. He died in 1898 in Aligarh, right? That's his photo. Um, so he was part of the aristocratic family. He was related to that, the Mughal aristocracy. His maternal grandfather also worked in British East India Company. And in 1837, Sir Syed also joined British East India Company. And as far as the religious or Sufi background is concerned, his family was devoted, basically spiritually devoted to the Shah Waliullah family. And this other Sufi saint, Ghulam Ali Naqshband, who's the descendant of Sheikh Sirhindi. Okay. His mother, like Sir Syed's mother, she was devoted to Ghulam Ali Naqshband, whereas the rest of the family was devoted to, for example, Shah Abdul Aziz. Okay. Yeah, so this is just a more explanation on it. Okay. He's said to have been the chief disciples of Delhi Saint Shah Ghulam Ali, right? With the rest of her family were Shah Abdul Aziz's disciples. She alone among her relatives had great affection and reverence for Shah Ghulam Ali. So anyway, this is just a general background. So the point is that his family's line goes back to the Shah Waliullah tradition again, and the general Naqshbandi revivalist spirit. Yeah, so his maternal grandfather had a prestigious position in company service, and Syed Ahmed himself joined the company in 1837. And he was later promoted, right, from a record keeper to subordinate judge, and then to chief assessment official, and so on. We'll discuss the mutant later on, so let's skip this here. So that's a general background, okay? This is family connections and where he was from, right? As far as his teachers or the shared lineage is concerned, he's, for example, associated with Maulana Mamluk Ali. And as we saw in the session on Deoband, Maulana Mamluk Ali, who is a student of Maulana Rashiduddin, and Maulana Rashiduddin is a student of Shah Abdul Aziz, right? So he's closely associated with the Shah Waliullah family. Maulana Mamluk Ali was also an associate of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, right? And the two were basically working in the Delhi College. So that's one scholarly link that connects Sir Syed with the broader ulama network. Okay. So yeah, we just have two basically lines. One is through his family, and the other one is through Mamluk Ali. Um, yeah, so his worldview actually goes through a lot of revolutions. The first phase of his intellectual ideas is basically whatever he wrote before 1857. So he wrote his first book in 1841, and it was about on Mawlid, right? The Mawlid celebration. And so the reason that he wrote that book, so at that time this was a genre. People would write, a book on the Prophet ﷺ on Mawlid, his birthday, and his life, basically, generally. And then those books would be recited in Delhi and other places, right, on the day of Mawlid. He wrote this book, again, because he was inspired by the Naqshbandi revivalist spirit. He wrote this book in which he only focused on, let's say, verified accounts like ahadith and other stories, which are basically reliable. Because I mean, according to him, there are a lot of stories about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which according to him had no basis in hadith or in other reliable books. So this was his first written work, and this also shows that early on in his life, Sir Syed was someone who was focused on the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That was like his religious spirit. In fact, this text, this precept is taken from the book, the book on the Ahl Quran, and here it says that Sayyid Ahmad Khan himself, he called himself a Wahhabi. Now I don't know if there's because this quote does not give any primary reference. So I'm a bit skeptical about this idea that he called himself a Wahhabi, but the rest of the thing that the book says, as far as Sayyid Ahmad Khan's general focus on ahadith and sunnat and his critique on bid'at, these are the things are proven. And he wrote several books like this. So he wrote this book on Mawlid in which he talked about, reliable reports on the Prophet ﷺ. Likewise, he wrote other books on bid'at. So he wrote this book. It's called Maslai Tasawwur Sheikh. And in this book, he talks about the Pir Muridi, basically the Sufi discipleship idea. And he critiques a lot of the ideas. For example, the idea that a Sufi saint has some powers. He criticizes that. And he also presents the right perspective as far as the relationship between a Sufi saint and his disciple is concerned, right? Kalimatul Haq is another book which was published in 1849, which discusses the issue of the Kalimatul Haq talks about the relationship between Pir and his murid. And this book, Masla Tasawwur Sheikh, Sayyid Ahmad Khan against miracles. Yeah, this was also about general Sufi ideas. He also wrote this book, Rah Sunnat Dar Radd Bidat, in 1850, in which he basically criticizes the prevalent customs in the name of Sufism. So this is before 1857, before the mutiny happens. The mutiny, by the way, changes his life. So before the 1857, he's writing books in the 40s and 50s, and his general attitude is, finding the right sunnat, and critiquing bid'at, writing books on Mawlid, and making sure that people have the right idea about it, right? This is his religious worldview, and these are the things that he's focused on. And just to give you, this is actually very funny, interesting anecdote. It says here that Sayyid Ahmad had an argument with his learned friend Maulana Sadruddin Azuda. By the way, he was a student of Shah Abdul Aziz and a close associate of Fazl Khair Abadi. And he also wrote a critique of Shah Ismail Delhi when that debate happened after Taqriyatul Iman. Anyway, so he had an argument with Sadruddin Azurda of Delhi College, during which Sayyid Ahmad burst out to assert his opinion that if a person does not eat a mango for the reason that the Prophet ﷺ did not eat it, then the angels will kiss his feet at his deathbed. Right. So this is the reason that I'm mentioning this is that as we go down the line, like the post in like the 1870 and onwards, that Sayyid Ahmad is radically different, and we'll see how. But this is, by the way, this is before 1857, okay? And this is his, worldview. He's talking about, general religious ideas. He's writing books and all of that. Other than those books on Biddat and other topics, he also, translated parts of Kimya Sadat. I did some more reading into this, and it seems like that his translation of Kimya Sadat into Urdu, that was inspired by, or at least it was like this idea was given by Haji Imdadullah Makki, right? And Haji Imdadullah Makki, again, he is the teacher of the Deoband scholars and the Bareli scholars later on, right? So Maulana Rashid Ahmad Gangohi Sahab and Maulana Qasim Nanutwi Sahab, they're both direct disciples of Maulana Haji Imdadullah Makki Sahab, okay? So he was the one who gave Sir Syed the idea to translate Kimya Sadat into Urdu, right? Kimya Sadat, the alchemy of happiness, into Urdu. And he also wrote some, like, translated some works basically on the Aina Akbari and others. Maybe you can read this later on. Yeah, so Asaro Sanadi, this is really important work, and it's about the historical monuments of Delhi with some biographical notes on the ulama and other figures who are associated with those, monuments. So, yeah, so this is just like his general written material, and this is what he's writing in Delhi College and in his personal capacity. Okay, so this is the Sir Sayyid before 1857. Okay, he's writing books on religious material, etc. But something changes when the mutiny happens, and I will explain the mutiny in detail because that's a turning point in his life. But right now, I'm just focusing on his religious, like the sort of books he wrote. Okay, so before 1857, he's writing books on religious topics, bidat, maulid, those things, which other ulama were also writing. And we saw the fierce debate and heated exchange that he had with Sadruddin Azurda. But when the mutiny happens, there's a shift in Sir Sayyid's thought. So this is what I call the transitionary period from 1857 till 69. Okay, and in this 12 years period, his focus is religious, but his focus is on Christianity, Muslim Christian relations, and Bible becomes his focus. He becomes the first Muslim author to write a commentary on the Bible, right? And he also attempts to learn Latin and English and the other Western languages in order to be able to read the Bible in its native language, right? And he gets into context. He gets into context with multiple Christian missionaries at that time to help him get material for Christian biblical studies and also material to translate, etc. Right. So this is his focus now, and obviously this is after when British officially took over Delhi and they established their colonial secular rule. This was a time when Muslim completely lost their political sovereignty, and this was the era in which Sir Syed was attempting to basically build bridges between the Christian masters and the dominated Muslims, right? So he wanted to give a positive outlook. And we see this in political terms as well, right? This is religiously, he is trying to build religious bridges between Muslims and Christians. And at the same time, as we'll see later on, he was also trying to build political bridges between Muslims and the British Christians. Okay, so as far as his religious ideas is concerned in this era, he's, for example, there's a huge debate going on as far as adopting Western dress is concerned, or dining with British officers, and being friends with them, etc. And he is basically presenting arguments from the Quran, from Hadith, etc. He's saying that no, we are all basically we share the same Semitic root. Bible is also a sacred book, and we're basically part of the same tradition. And we consider Christ, Isa alayhi salam, to be a Christ, etc. So he's talking about these things, and he's also saying that there's nothing wrong with eating with your British officer or adopting their dress. In fact, I was reading the book "Making a Muslim" by Dr. Zaidi, which I think shared that in the group chat as well. And in that book, there's one guy, one scholar, Maulana Imdadullah, sorry, Maulana Imdadul Ali, and he is writing a sarcastic response to Sir Sayyid, and that the response was basically he was critiquing Sir Sayyid's ideas such as Muslims can adopt Western dress, right? So in Aligarh, people like students had a different dress. They would wear the fez, right? The fez, the topi kind of thing. And this was actually heavily contested, heavily debated by ulama and others. Haji Imdadul Ali, by the way, we'll see the back and forth between them. He was actually an Ahl Hadith scholar. So this is the era in which Sir Said's focus now is to build bridges between Muslims and Christians, right? And so this is basically like the blueprint. So he writes multiple books. For example, he writes this book, Ahkam Ta'am Ahl Kitab. I think this was written in Persian or Urdu, I don't know. But he's quoting Quran and Hadith. It's saying that Muslims and Christians are, friends, etc. Yeah, it says here, gigantic project of writing the first, if not the only, Muslim commentary of the Bible in modern times to dispel misunderstandings prevalent among adherents of both religions regarding each other's religious doctrines. Okay. He made up for his deficiencies in Latin, Hebrew, and English by employing scholars well versed in these languages. Yeah. So I mean, he also travels to England. By the way, he travels to England. This is, I think, in 1870. His son becomes admitted into Cambridge and later becomes a judge as well. And when he during his I think he spent a couple of years in England, and during that time he wrote a response to William Moyer. William Moyer was the colonial administrator, also an Orientalist, who wrote a very derogatory book on the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, in which he basically questioned the legitimacy of hadith, and he also wrote other Islamophobic content as well. And interestingly enough, William Moore and Sir Syed were friends. They were actually very close friends. And Sir Syed was not happy with that book, and he really hated the fact that, a guy like William Moore, who he respected a lot and considered him as a friend, he wrote a book like that. And so then he spends, I think, a year or two writing a response while he's in England. And that book was first written in Urdu, but he did not publish the Urdu version. And the reason he did not publish this was because he realized that if I publish this, it's going to create a chaos. The ulama will not like it. Why? Because what he said in that book was radically different from our traditional understanding. In that book, he questions the legitimacy of a lot of ahadith, right? And he basically changes his religious orientation. And it's happening in this period, by the way, right? So we're seeing this change in, a guy, somebody who was writing books on bid'at and Mawlid. Post 1857, he's now focused on Muslim-Christian relations, hadith studies, isnad, criticism, and biblical studies, etc. Right? So this is the Sir Syed of 1857 till 1869. Yeah, so he was personal friends with leading Orientalists like Spengler, Moyer, and others. Yeah, so William Moore's controversial book on the life of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, it was in response to his book that Syed was forced to radically revise his own religious views, mainly on hadith and also on other aspects of the Isnad paradigm. This new trend in Sayyid Ahmed's religious outlook, for which immediate impetus came from Moyer, lasted till his death in 1898. Okay, by the way, and this revisionism on hadith was the reason. In fact, it was actually the precedent for the Ahl Quran movement, right? Whatever he wrote and what his associates like Chiragh Ali, Sayyid Amir Ali, and Mahdi Ali, Mohsin al-Mulk was his title. Those individuals who were associates, they were also called early modernists. They also wrote similarly to Cersei. They were questioning Ahadi, they were questioning the purpose of the Quran, right? For example, Sayyid Mahdi Ali wrote that, forget Hadith, he already questions that. He even writes that the Quran is just a spiritual book. It's not supposed to give you any laws. And this was his foundation for creating Chiragh Ali also took this idea and he wanted to establish basically Muslim civil law or something like this. So they were lawyers, and these were their ideas, and all of their ideas were inspired by Sir Sayyid's radical revisionism of Hadith and the Isnad paradigm. We don't have to get into the detail of like what his, for example, 7 points of Sir Sayyid was with regards to Hadith studies. This is like a tangent. We don't have to discuss this. But the point is that we see a radical change in Sir Sayyid's thought. He's questioning Hadith now, whereas before he was quoting Hadith to support certain, right practices and opposing other customs which do not have any basis in Hadith or Quran. And by post 1870, he's a full naturalist. So just to give you a glimpse of his ideas, this is his refined ideas. So he believes that Allah is just a deist first cause. Okay, the laws of the laws of nature cannot be broken. Okay, uh, and he denied the efficiency of prayer. So if you pray, or if you pray, you have some du'as that you memorize. Those things have no influence on the movement or the on life itself. Why? Because the world is a physical, temporal entity, and your prayers have nothing. It doesn't have the. They can be the efficient cause of something in this physical, natural world. So he's a full naturalist now. Prophethood he deemed a natural faculty present in some with highly developed sensitivities, men who had no need of angelic messengers, whom he understood as symbols. He denies the existence of Satan, Iblis. He thinks that it's just like a category of evil which was presented in the Quran, so that Muslims can understand it, that this is evil, certain actions are evil, and we should avoid it. Likewise, jinn and angels, he questions their existence. Miracles, he doesn't believe them in anymore. So this is the last you know iteration of Sir Syed's thought, right? After 1870, he's full naturalist. So he started off as somebody who's writing on Bidat and Mawlid, quoting ahadith and Quran. Then there's a change. He's focusing on Muslim-Christian relations, writing commentary in the Bible. And then there's another change. And by the way, the reason that this change happened was when he traveled to England. When he came back, and we'll see how that travel affected him radically. It was after he came back from England that he just completely changed. Interestingly enough, by the way, even though Cersei denied the existence of, he did not believe in miracles. The person to who he responded, I mean, William Moore believed in miracles. So this is very interesting. Like Cersei even went one step ahead. Okay, and the point that I mentioned earlier of Mahdi Ali, Mohsin al-Mulk, he went like 3-4 steps forward. He denied obviously hadith, but he even denied like he created a categorization within the Quran saying that certain things are of secular nature, and certain things are of religious nature. And he also denied miracles in these things. So this is basically we've come full circle now. This is just the book. The response that he wrote to Moir was not published in Urdu, even though it was written in Urdu originally. Its English translation was published. Okay, and it was published on. It was in the 70s, I think. It was published. Yeah. So, yeah. So this is his general. By the way, so this is after, you know, he came back from England. So, and this is a very problematic statement, by the way. So, in a notorious literature published in the Aligarh Institute Gazette, it was established by Sir Syed, by the way, he judged his fellow countrymen to be in need of total reform. We in Hindustan look upon the English as possessing evil disposition, saying that they look upon Hindustanis as animals or beasts and consider them low to a degree. They do not understand us. And moreover, I say in truth that we are so. I mean, we are beasts and, etc., animals. I say without exaggeration and in all sincerity that all Hindustanis, from the highest to the lowest, richest to the poorest, merchants to the laborers, the best educated and the most ignorant, we are in comparison with the breeding and affability of the English as dirty, unclean, wild beasts in the presence of beautiful and worthy men. I know my countrymen will take this as hard thing for me. So not only are his theological ideas changed, even his like general ideas on people is radically changed. Okay. His acceptance. So this, like I said, it's after he came back from England. His acceptance of their image of Indians became far more pronounced after his trip to England to place his son in school in Cambridge. This trip marked another major turning point in his life. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So this is another very interesting thing that I found. So this is he's writing a letter to a European firm in which he's saying that if you have two machines and one is gigantic and expensive and the other one is light and economical, give us the latter. I mean, us Hindustanis, give us the latter because we are the people of my country are not intelligent enough to operate it. So this letter was published from the Aligarh Scientific Society, which was disbanded after after little time, because they were translating books into science from Western sources, Western sciences into Urdu, but there was no readership. Like nobody was reading them. Okay. So anyway, this is yours to say. Okay, this is the last iteration of his thought. Okay, a full naturalist, and with other opinion that he has. We'll explore his thoughts more. Okay, it's more ideas are coming. So okay, but let's discuss his interaction with the ulama. So there's a very interesting exchange between Maulana Qasim and Sir Syed. And that letter exchange is actually published here in this. It's published by the students. It was published by the Deoband Deoband. It's called Glistering Faith, Tafsiyat al-Aqaid. In this letter exchange, Sir Syed presents 15 principles, 15 points, which are the basis of his, which are the basis of his hermeneutics. Like hermeneutics is basically how you interpret the sacred text. What are your sources? How you interpret them, right? That's what hermeneutics is. Hermeneutics. So he presents these 15 points, and then Maulana Qasim also respond to them. So it's a very interesting back and forth. You should read it. And that letter exchange, by the way, will give you a good idea of Islamic modernism on the one hand and traditional revivalism led by Maulana Qasim on the other. Okay. I won't get into details. You can read again page 225 to 231 to understand the full exchange, in particular the response of Maulana Qasim. But these are like the 5 points out of the 15. These are the 5 points that Sir Said mentioned. And we see again the modernist, revisionist type of worldview that Sir Said had. So God and the Prophet's words cannot contradict empirical reality. Maulana Qasim response to this is very interesting. I highly recommend you check that. And point number two, principle number two, when any verse in the Quran seems to contradict truth or empirical reality, there are only two possible explanations for this apparent contradiction. Either we have misunderstood the Quranic words, or we have erred in our understanding of truth and empirical reality. So there are five other points. But again, the two had a good relationship. Respectful relationship. In this, at the end of this letter exchange, both of them actually, present themselves as humble interlocutors, right? So Said is saying that "Aap hamare alim hain, you are a great scholar. I'm just a government officer or something." Whereas Mullah Qasim was saying that I'm just a powerless faqir alim, and you're a very influential and all that. So yeah, so they were actually on a very positive terms, and this exchange actually ended on positive note. But the grandson of Mullah Qasim, Mullah Qari Tayyib, he wrote a devastating critique of Sir, and he was so harsh, so critical of him. And it was, he criticizes, for example, he criticizes Sir Said on the point of imitation, imitating the West, imitating British officers. There's an interesting discussion on that as well. Perilous Intimacy, chapter 6, and yeah, chapter 6 also talk about Maulana Qari Tayyib's response to Sir Sayyid. And likewise, when Maulana Qasim passed away, Sir Sayyid published in his Aligarh Institute Gazette. Basically, he was very sad. He said that it is not enough to weep over him. Our nation talks and does not act. The bun in his memorial must be kept alive. Yeah, I mentioned this point earlier, the connection between Sir Syed and Haji Imdadullah Makki. This is before 1857. Yeah, so he had a fight with, he got into a controversy with Ali Bakhsh. Rana Ali Bakhsh is a scholar associated with the Ahl Sunnah movement, and the two got into intense exchange. And the Marana Ali Bakhsh then basically he asked a fatwa against a Sayyid from ulama. And so then he actually attained that fatwa. So in 1873, Ali Bakhsh went to Hijaz and secured a fatwa of kufr against Sir Syed. Okay. Likewise, Imdadul Ali also got into a controversy with him. It was on the whole idea. He wrote a so uh, Tazhib al-Akhlaq was a journal of Sir Syed in which he would talk about, how Muslims can improve their moral, life, etc. How they can become civilized in these things. And so Maulana Ali is also wrote against that. Other than that, he also, mocks the way that Aligarh was being run, right? So he says that in Imdadul Ali wrote an article warning students that they would be better prepared for employment if they attended government schools. At Aligarh, they would, he warned, like native Christians, change their names. Mr. Bacon and Pig is suggested as one name, and in place of angarkhas and pajamas, will begin to wear coats and patloons. So this is pantaloons, denying their poor relations and begin to give their. So anyway, so he's like really, really criticizing uh, those who are going to Aligarh. So yeah, he had a fight with a scholar of Ahl Hadith, a scholar of Ahl Sunnat, and a letter exchange with Maulana Qasim of Deoband. Okay. Uh, yeah, so this is important. Okay, on the British rule, how he understood, how he considered the British rule and the way forward, his solution to the plight of Muslims at that time. Just give me a second. Okay. um, yeah, so when the mutiny happened, just to give a background, when the mutiny happened, ulama, for the most part, so there were some ulama who did not want Muslims to take up arms against the British. And Dr. Metcalfe mentions Maulana S. N. Nanotwi, who is the distant relative of Maulana Qasim. He was the one who did not, I think he gave a speech in Jamia Masjid of Delhi as well. And he said not to take up arms. This will make things worse for us. But there were obviously scholars who did take part against the British during the mutiny. Maulana Qasim and Maulana Rashid Gangohi Sahib, they took part. Haji Dadullah Makki had to leave India and migrate to Hejaz. They took part. And there were plenty other scholars as well who took part. Fazl Karabadi, even though it is written in many books that he did take part, he wrote a fatwa against the British, basically legitimizing jihad. But there's a recent article coming up. It's an academic article written by a great scholar in which he's doubting this. He's saying that this was a different Fazl Haq. And I have the link to the article. It just came out, by the way, as we were going through this course. It just came out, and Maulana Salim Siddhat was the one who was kind enough to share that with me, and I just found that very interesting. Otherwise, every single secondary material I've read, whether it's Dr. Said Athar Abbas Rizvi's biographies on Shah Abdul Aziz, he talks about Fazl Khairabadi writing a fatwa. Dr. Metcalfe talks about it. Usha Sanyal, Dr. Qasim Zaman, I think, also talks about. So every other scholar that I've read talks about it. But this new article, which just came out, I think, weeks ago, uh, basically denies this. And I couldn't find the PDF of it, but it's interesting, contribution. So anyway, so while ulama were generally, either against it or they were saying that not to take up arms or these things, Sir Syed took a different approach. He became really pro-British at that time. He wanted to prove from that time the loyalty of Muslims, right? So yeah, I mean, so by the way, Sir Syed also suffered personally because of that, right? In the mutiny, he decisively threw in his lot with the British, risking his own life to save English lives and actively opposing the rebels. Among those rebels were his closest associates, and among those who suffered were his kin and friends. His own house was sacked, his mother's servants killed before his eyes, his maternal uncle killed, his mother herself died shortly after the mutiny from natural causes. He saw Muslim families ruined, their land confiscated, the king disgraced. Delhi, which he so loved, was occupied, large areas razed, his favorite building destroyed. The psychological turmoil that this experience engendered was for a time so overwhelming that Sir Syed contemplated immigration, leaving India to retreat, as had some of his teachers, like Maulana Yaqub and others, to the Hejaz. Gradually, he became convinced that the British rule was long to stay, and that those Muslims aligned with it would be both true to their religion and prosperous. He had to convince his fellow Muslim of the truth of this position, and he had to show them, as well as himself, that the British, despite their barbarities and arrogance, were admirable. To the British, he had to show that the Muslims were both his loyal and important to the stability of their rule. It was his driving psychological need to effect intellectual and political reconciliation that moved Sayyid Ahmed's course apart from his sometime fellow reformers. His efforts, if not his religious thought, were to be welcomed by many Muslims of his day. Yeah. So this was a very traumatic event, the mutiny. And like I said before that he was also working for the British East India Company, and he basically joined it in 1857, right? And he was a judge. Um, and from early on, like right after the mutiny began, he was fully supporting the British, even though, I mean, it was very traumatic for him. He saw his close friends, his associates, and, relatives being killed right in front of him. But he understood that the British Empire was here to stay, and we have to find a way to make the conditions of Muslim better. Okay. So yeah, like I said, the British were here to stay, and the only way to improve, because Muslims were really destroyed after that mutiny, as far as North India is concerned. So he was like, okay, how do we improve the situation? And the solution that he found was we should show loyalty to the British, and that will give us, privileges, and preserve our, future. Okay. But by the way, he was thoroughly religious, by the way. He had that religious spirit. He wasn't like an atheist or something. Despite his what we may call heretical ideas, he was deeply religious. I mean, he wanted a religious type of he believed in a religious type of world. So yeah, as far as his loyalist writings are concerned, he wrote this book, an essay on the causes of the Indian Revolt, in which he showed that the British were actually not paying attention to the Muslim governed public, and by doing so, would better the relationship between the two. So he's presenting a positive case for the Muslims. Another interesting turning point as far as his political project is concerned is the rising Hindu activists and movements who wanted to impose Hindi and Sanskrit as the language of court or official language alongside Urdu, yeah, in place of Urdu. And this was his turning point. This was the point after which he became a Muslim communitarian as far as politics is concerned. So indeed, Sir Syed Ahmed Khan later declared with some exaggeration that it was over the language issue that his concerns shifted from well-being of the mixed Hindu-Muslim elite to that of Muslim community alone. So he opposed Congress as well, he and other things, but that's a different long discussion. So the language issue, shifted him to the Muslim communitarianism. But yeah, I mean, like he attempted to show the loyalty of Muslims, to tell the British ruling elite that we are loyal to you, and this was his plan, his strategy to improve the relations of Muslim. But unfortunately, I mean, Sir Said actually failed at that. In fact, um, it was very obvious that generally speaking, the British colonial elite did not consider Indians with uh, with equality. Equality is a very heavy word, but like they did not consider them even humans in some instances. Of course, there were some individual Englishmen, but for the most part, like the rule was that this arrogant racism was prevalent. So much so that the son of Sir Syed, Syed Mahmud, who was Cambridge educated, who was also a judge, by the way, right? He died broke, like he was poor when he died, right? And that's just an example. Like his British colleagues, Said Mahmoud's British colleagues never accepted him as equal, part of their clubs and part of their circle. They just never accepted him, right? And by the way, the same Justice Mahmoud of the Allahabad High Court, right, son of Said, he was the one who basically solved many cases between Hanafis and the Ahl Hadith, right? So there were a lot of issues. I haven't covered this in detail, but there were a lot of issues that that emerged in 1860s, 70s, and 80s between the Hanafis, so Deoband, and not Deoband because Deoband is not formed yet, like it's not a formed identity. But like Hanafis in general, whether it's Bareli, the Ahl Sunnah, everyone, the Farangi Mahal, the Khairabadi, all of them were Hanafis. Between Hanafis and Ahl Hadith, there were intense debates. and there were fights over mosques. So if there was a Hanafi mosque, they would not allow the Ahl Hadith audience to pray there because the Ahl Hadith do Raful Yadain, they speak, they say Ameen loud, right? They say, for example, the Fatiha behind the Imam, right? So these were the things that were basically, the point of contention between the Hanafi public and the minority Ahl Hadith. And that, so both of the groups would take the issue to the British court, and the British court would have to, either say that, the mosque should be given to the Ahl Hadith or they should be given to, the Hanafis. So this is the Justice Mahmood, okay, and this man died broke, right? So unequal relations. That's why I've titled this section. Like I said, he was a friend with these uh, Orientalists. Okay, so legacy. I'm gonna finish this up. So Aligarh is obviously his most important contribution. Aligarh was established in 1875, um, and yeah, it was a place in which Western sciences could be translated and disseminated in the Indian public. Sir Syed was happy with that. He was the head of it. Uh, okay. There was the Aligarh Scientific Society, right? It was later called Aligarh Society, but first it was called Ali Scientific Society, 1864. And many translations of Western sciences and philosophy happened, but because there was no readership, nobody was interested in reading these works, the society had to be disbanded. And the quote that I mentioned earlier about expensive machine and inexpensive machine, and Sir Syed saying that he telling the European firm to give the light and inexpensive machine to the natives because that thing was published from this society, by the way. And he also began his, newspaper, the Aligarh Institute Gazette, in which he, for example, wrote that small article when Maulana Qasim passed away. Um, yeah. Yeah, so again, the Aligarh or Sir Syed, the Islamic modernists in general, with few exceptions, they can be considered as someone who are religious. Like their ideas are definitely far away. They're like off the mark. They're way far away from the traditional understanding. But the spirit that is basically motivating them, fueling them, is religion. It's deen. They want to have um, uh, they want to have the new theology, the kalam jadid. They want to have a new perspective on hadith. So the Ahl Quran emerged, right? The Ahl Quran were not a bunch of atheists. Their views were heretical, but they were like inspired by deen. They wanted to reform religion, and they were deeply invested in this religious discourse. Um, so likewise, Aligarh, it was something that actually took pride in being Muslim, um, as opposed like in conversation as they would converse with the British and foreigners, they would take pride in their Muslim identity. So yes, I think it's just important to mention this. We can skip this one. Yeah, so the Ahli Quran, the Quran movement is also, you can say an offshoot of Sir Sayyid's thought. So when Sir Sayyid wrote that book in response to Moyer, that was the first, that actually laid the precedent for the Ahl Quran movement to emerge. Okay. So Dr. Metcalfe in his book, Islamic Revival, she associates the Ahl Quran with Ahl Hadith movement, but that is wrong. If you read the book on the Ahl Quran movement, it's a book dedicated to them. It's a full study. Dr. Metcalfe only dedicates like one page to it, 1 or 2 pages. The book says that this idea is just wrong, and this was repeated by multiple scholars. By the way, it's not just that Barbara Metcalfe says this. Scholars like this, another scholar like his name is Brown. He's written a book, Islamic Thought or something. And there are other scholars too who have said the same thing, that the Ahl Quran was basically a splinter group of the Ahl Hadith. That is wrong. The Ahl Quran finds its inspiration from Sir Sayyid, and the scholar who was a student who was associated with the Ahl Hadith movement was Abdullah Chakralwi, and Abdullah Chakralwi was a student of Maulana Nazir Hussain Dehlvi. But he wasn't the only person, by the way. There were many, many, figures. It's The Ahl Quran was a disparate group. Like there were different figures in Punjab and some in North India, and they're writing basically this no understanding of Quran. And then the legacy was carried on by Ghulam Parvez in Pakistan, right? So yeah, I just wanted to clarify that now that I found the time. You can read this basically. It's just like I said, early associates, Chirag Ali, Mahdi Ali, I mentioned some of their ideas above. Deputy Nazir Ahmed is another one. He also wrote a translation of the Quran. He also wrote a book similar to Bahisht-e-Zever. Bahisht-e-Zever is a book on, it's a fiqh issue, but like it's written for women, okay, and how they can carry on their, daily day-to-day routine. Deputy Nazir Ahmed wrote a similar book like that. And but he's most famous known for Ibn al-Waqt. Ibn al-Waqt was a novel in which he describes two friends, and one of the friend becomes a British officer, like working for the British government, and the other becomes a scholar. And then the story, progresses, and we see that the guy who became the British officer is humiliated all the time by his British associates or seniors. They don't consider him equal. They look down upon him. But whereas when the Maulana, like his friend, when the Maulana approaches, and all the British officers were like, very respectful of him. And even though the British officer friend became, he changed his dress, his lifestyle, he shaved his beard, and all of these things, he was still not respected. Right. That's the story of the novel. But the alim friend was being respected, even though he kept a beard, wore a turban, and wore shalwar kameez or something. So it's an interesting story, and that shows, like, the book shows the anxieties um, of early modernists like Deputy Nazir Ahmad, Sir Syed's Ahmad San, and other, like, their anxiety with the idea that they were not, considered equal by the ruling elite. Altaf Hussain Hollywood, the Musaddas, is like famous for that. Okay? Sayyid Amir Ali is another book. I have his book. I have Musaddas. I also have The Spirit of Islam by Sayyid Amir Ali. This is just like ideas of Chirag Ali. Okay? You can read them later on. Yeah, so this is it. This is a short, you know, basically introduction of Sir Syed and his Aligarh movement. We saw his biography, where he was born, his family and relations, teachers, shared lineage. Lineage goes back to the Shah Waliullah tradition, um, and his worldview, how it changed in like three iterations, three distinct phases. Um, yeah, interaction with ulama. We saw that his famous interaction with Mulana Qasim, with Haji Imdadullah Makki, with Mulana Ali Bakhsh, Mulana Imdadul Ali, his ideas on the British rule, the legitimacy of the British rule, his shift to Muslim communitarianism, his anxieties and like the idea that the Muslims and the British ruling elite were not equal, like not on the same plane. Um, yeah, and his legacy, the early Gurd, the Ahl Quran movement, and the early associates and followers. So this was a say. Again, there are a lot of things that we can discuss, a lot of things that we can, but it's just we don't have a lot of time. So I'll end this and I'm going to read the chat and then we can discuss. What does being in England really gave him internalized racism? Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's very sad. Uh, yeah, thank you for sharing this. Are you got first generation? Yes, I have the PDF of this. I read it a few chapters. I'm going to share that. I'm going to upload that into Google Drive. How influential is Aligarh today? Still very influential. Yeah, I don't know about the right now, how like the Aligarh is, like what they're doing right now. So, but yeah, that's it. So, anyone who
Um,
wants to say something this time?
yeah, so I just have a few questions, if I may. Yeah, so it's interesting how he swings from one extreme of Wahhabism to the other extreme of Deism. Deism, right? This is what you say. So I find that it's quite characteristic of these extremists. You find that from one extreme they go to another extreme. Anyhow, um, so do we find do we find later figures who adopt this extreme heretical doctrine of deism um, specifically? I know
Um,
you talked about figures, being influenced
figures.
by
Martin Thomas.
exactly. Yeah, I
I don't
mean
know much about
that's an
this, but
example.
I've heard the name somewhere. I think it was some debates that I watched, I think almost a decade ago on YouTube. I think it was Abdullah Andalusi in that. I don't know. But that name, I know that he's in the UK or something has happened to him. But yeah, so back to the question. I don't know. But deism in India. So, by the way, I forgot to mention one thing. Modernism, Islamic modernism in India British India, whatever, can be considered into two phases, right? We can divide them into two phases. Early phase, so early modernist, and then late modernist. If you talk about the political orientation and the political, outlook of modernists, early modernists are all docile. They don't want any activism. They don't want to, offend the British. They're just very like full loyalist, right? The ulama are also not politically active. They're also politically docile, but they're not pro-British the way that these modernists are. Like the modernists are explicitly like they want to, for example, so Syed wanted to show loyalty. Even to the ulama after the 1857, like for example, Maulana Rashid Ahmed Gangohi Sahib, he wrote actually a book, or I think it was one of his fatwa where he said that we don't have to migrate from India now that British are ruling over us. We don't have to migrate from anywhere. They're Christians, and historically, we Muslims have migrated to the first hijrah that Muslim did, right, to Christian land, Abyssinia. So it's the same thing, and we don't have to worry about it. We just have to focus on our deen, etc. But there was always, a tension. There was always this idea to. That's why they did not even accept patronage for the most part from British institutes. The Deoband was for the most part funded by the Awam and some aristocrats. But so this is the early modernists. The late modernists and later ulama, both of them are politically activist. And as far as political activism is concerned, it's the modernists who are taking center stage. The modernists are basically they're leading the political activism and anti-colonial struggle against the British. And obviously, like Sheikh al-Hind and other scholars are also part of that. But it was spearheaded by the late modernists, like, for example, the Ali brothers and plenty other figures. Um, so I just want to share that we have two
Mm,
phases as far as political activism is concerned. Theologically speaking, like the question that you asked, so we have deism here.
mm.
Well, I don't know what was the. So if you look at Sayyid Amir Ali, I don't think that he shares his idea
Yeah,
theologically. Like these were lawyers.
yeah. It
So,
doesn't appear to be. Yeah, yeah.
so
It's
I guess
interesting, Amir Ali. Jinnah. He wasn't known to be a voracious reader. Outside at least of his legal, area. He specialized in. But the one book he did have was the Spirit of Islam by
it's a
I think.
horrible book. I mean, it's a horrible book.
So I just
Oh, I think I have lost the book. I think it's in the other room, but it's not there. That's weird.
the Spirit of Islam.
Yeah. It's a horrible book, but I just thought that I should give it a read. Uh,
You wouldn't recommend that book.
Khair, I shouldn't say horrible. I was just exaggerating, but
Mm.
yeah, I mean, I just don't like the book. I think it has a lot of problems. But I found this book, Tarikh Baghawat Hind.
Okay.
It's by it's written by Pandit Kanhaiya Lal. It's written by a Hindu, and it talks about the entire event. It's in Urdu,
Ah,
and
okay.
yeah,
Yes.
I read a few pieces.
Yeah,
Very interesting.
Kanhaiya Lal. Yeah, I'm aware of him. He was a Punjabi. He wrote. The I was so was he self-consciously did he subconsciously think he's bringing something new, or was he inspired by a pre-modern strand of thought, Muslim thought, or was he just, did he subconsciously think, this is something new, I'm bringing, in
Yeah,
terms of what,
the three
yeah.
phases, the three
Mm,
phases of his thought. The first one, I mean, we can find, certain precedents, like the whole debate in Mawlid. The debate in Mawlid is not new. You can go back to Ibn Taymiyyah. You can go back to other scholars who are writing about this. Um, but the second and the third phase, no, that's totally different. Like his ideas, for example, on he did something which obviously was very innovative, like him writing a commentary on the Bible. Like nobody did that. But like as far as self-consciously aware of his reformist agenda and saying, being aware that yeah, I'm actually bringing new things into it. That's I think from 1857 onwards. After 57,
mm,
he was pretty aware that yeah, there's a British institutions, British knowledge, Western sciences, their ideas. We have to accept that. And after that, the
yeah.
visit to England when he came back, he was like, yeah, man, we're it's
And was he, in terms of, he's obviously Anglophile in thought, but what about in dress? Did he dress like the white man? Gora.
I don't know about that, but
Mm,
the uniform of Aligarh was severely criticized in Out Punch, which was an akhbar, a newspaper, where and in Out Punch, most of the ideas or the contributors were against Sir Syed, right? So they would write against Aligarh and all of that.
mm,
There's a lecture coming up in which we'll talk about how print transformed and basically created a Muslim reading public. And
mm,
what were the consequences of this reading public? How was religious discourse transformed? How are Muslims now interacting? What was Muslim like? How did Muslim become a qawm, right? A qawm, a political entity, right? As opposed to just a religious, group. So print, by the way, the question of qawm was also debated vis-a-vis the Hindus and the British, and also internal conflicts were happening as well. So right, debates on that, debates on the current condition of Muslims. How do we revive our condition? Some would say, yeah, we need to adopt sciences of the West. Some would say it's our moral decay that needs revive. So the Deoband and others, right? Some would say that um, you know uh, some would point to moral issues. Some would say that we have abandoned our own tradition of like wearing our own culture or these things, dresses. That's why. So there's a lot of debates going on, a lot of accusations happening, right? Sir Said, for example, was accused of a lot of things. Um, Accusations of apostasies are also becoming
mm.
frequent. Takfir, right, during the press is also like reaches a new stage, because now the public are educated. The public can read, and the public can also write articles in newspaper, and they can publish, they can let the world hear what they want to say.
Yeah.
And that's a problem that generates a lot of issues, tensions,
Mm.
but it also generates a lot of benefits. So yes,
I was just actually thinking, in terms of like a pre-modern strand, like for example, Ibn Rushd, like the philosophy, like the philosophical strand. So the idea that God, just creates the world and then leaves it, like that.
Yeah.
So maybe, maybe an element of influence may have been from from there as well. I guess there is a precedent, I guess, in some
Mm.
respects to that. But obviously he was bringing a lot of things new, in terms of what he was doing. So psychologically, that 1857 clearly was a sort of
Yeah,
a
it was a lot.
psychologically shocking.
It
Yeah.
was a lot for him. He saw
Mm,
his family being killed, friends
mm.
being killed. Yeah, so I guess. Yes, Hussein.
Yes, Jazakallah. Thank you very much, Shah. Well, very good coverage of a complex and a deeply influential legacy of Sir Syed. I think in the past we've also already talked about the context of it, so I don't need to revisit 1857, the influence of that, the influence of England and trips that you've covered that, captured that exceedingly well. I would just like to situate Sir Syed and his influence in four quadrants. So if you can just imagine that and certainly his thoughts was evolving. It wasn't as much as that he was abandoning his previous thoughts, but his focus was moving separately. So he was beginning to focus a little bit differently. There are different types of maturity in people's lifespans and their thoughts during that time. Sometimes they abandon what they used to believe, and then they think about something else, and then that project either succeeds or fails, and they tinker with it. The impression that I get from whatever I've secondhand information that I've been able to obtain of Sir Syed's life is that he had different phases of life, and he had different focus areas at different context of it, and that's completely perfectly understandable. So the way I would look at it is that if you put it, and this is neither positive or negative. It's just the way stating it the way it is. He came from an elitist background. He had an elitist bent. He had elitist views. There is no doubt about that. That's something that traveled with him for a long period of time. We shouldn't be too harsh on somebody like him from that period. It was lingua franca, as they say. He certainly was also one of the progenitors of an exclusivist mentality, or at least some form of looking at Muslim community as a community and developing some guardrails around that. That's probably a more charitable explanation of it. Others might say that, look, he was treating Ashraf separately, and he was very concerned about the loss of influence as such. So those things are there, right? He certainly also had a modernist, progressive mentality. Progressive, I mean, purely from a European traditional perspective. So dress was one of them. It was very well known. Not that he had abandoned a traditional Islamic dress, but he did incorporate. He would not look any different from any of the Turks and during the Ottoman era, when the post Tanzimat reform era. Like he would wear those long coats and things like that. But what was interestingly culturally problematic, let me put it that way, is the fact that he would espouse people to eat with forks and knives,
Yeah.
using English cutlery, all of those things, which somewhat you could understand where he's coming from, but it alienated a lot of the masses at that time, and it made him deeply unpopular when some of those things were happening. Having said that, you cannot discount the fact that his influence on the academic temperament of the Muslim community was immense. There is no doubt about the fact that the scientific bent that he was able to bring in, and the
Mm.
institution that he set up, far went beyond his ideology. Right now, I'm indebted to that. I mentioned this before. My grandfather, my father-in-law, they're all graduates of Aligarh. These are extremely rational, strong, judicious people from various different backgrounds. They come in and they study different things. One of the people were questioning, I think Fari was questioning, how influences it. It is still hugely influential. I mean, not we're talking about former prime minister of Bangladesh, presidents of India, prime ministers of different places, or heads of institution. They all are alumni of Aligarh. Aligarh today is still in the top 10 of the universities in India, national universities of India. And this is the second Muslim university that it enters into the top 10. Jamia Millia Islamia, which was from Sheikh Hind, it is also in the top 10. So the influence that these people had back in 1870s to 1920s still carries on today. It is a vibrant political hotbed of debate,
Mm.
of opposition. Just a few years ago, you had a huge picture of Jinnah used to hang in the halls, and that created a huge issue. The chancellors of Aligarh Muslim University would always be targeted by the extreme right-wing groups in India. So they are deeply entrenched, and you have had good chancellors, you've had terrible chancellors as well. I mean, let me be blunt about those things. So those things have existed. Aligarh has still a magnetic ability to collect people The only two other things I would quickly say is that I was giving a couple of references. You can go and have a look at Sir Syed, and let's remove Sir Syed from his AMU project, or originally it was called as the Muslim Anglo-Oriental Project, which then basically became Ali Muslim University. On the Wahhabism element, I just wanted to make one mention of it. So a lot of these uh, self-confessed reform people thought that whatever they're hearing about what Wahhabism is coming up in Arabia, they thought that it is more of a bent on modernist tendencies. So they did not necessarily know the details or the depth of the doctrinal positions or ideological issues. Had they known about
Uh,
it, they would not have been able to call themselves that. This is very different. Wahhabism, or the way it was emanating to Ahl Hadith or other modernist movements, very different. I wouldn't put them together. I was reading recently, finishing one of the best books on the history of Wahhabism these days is called Banzals. It has issues, but it is still the most comprehensive book. And somewhat recent book is Yasir Qadhi's on Salafism. So these two will give you a sense of what Wahhabism and Salafism is really all about, and it's very different from the project that you had emanating in India. Last thing I wanted to mention is the fact that we cannot discount the influence of Sir Syed on the language issue. I think you briefly touched upon it, but that was a huge hot rod issue. Sir Syed remains, I wouldn't call it a complex figure. I think he remains an influential, consequential figure.
mhm.
With I would just the last point I wanted to mention. I would never categorize him in the same level of the Quilliam Institute or Majid Nawaz. Those are deplorable, reprehensible people. They've had hugely damaging effects on British Muslim societies. Aligarh Muslim University and the positive elements of Sir Syed is vastly different. You may have creedal issues, you may have cultural issues with Sir Syed, and I think it's very valid for us to have that. But you cannot discount the influence, the legacy, and the consequence of somebody who influenced 200 years, of Muslim generations almost. So that's my piece on that front.
So I have a
Yeah,
question.
I just wanted to say, yeah, thank you. I just want to say two things. So on the point of Urdu become, I mean, Zarsaid was central to turning Urdu into a robust prose language, in which, so this is in the 1840s and 50s. Urdu language, sorry, many Western philosophical works, scientific works are translated into Urdu, and Zarsaid is the head of that. He's running that. And I think this is happening in Delhi College. So he is central again to as far as Urdu is concerned. आज जो हम उर्दू बोल रहे हैं, I think जो
Yeah,
प्रोज की जबान में है.
we're indebted to his works and
Yeah,
his university, in fact. That
yeah. And as far as the Wahhabi, so the term Wahhabi was considered to be anti-British, and it was seen with
exactly.
great hostility by the British.
It was a sub use for jihadi,
Yeah,
essentially,
exactly.
and not jihadi of the 21st century. I'm talking about
Mhm.
150
Yeah.
years ago.
The Tariqa Muhammadiyya of Maulana Shah Ismail Dehlavi and Sayyid Ahmad Bareilly, they were also termed as Wahhabis by the British government at that time. And after the revolt was after the movement was completely it ended. There were rumors that a new movement, like a new Wahhabi movement, is emerging in Delhi. And so British spies were running around in Delhi and they're basically looking out for like maybe clues or something. So they found out that this one scholar in Delhi is about to do something. He's very hostile to the British and all of that. He's criticizing it and looks like he's going to start something. So I think early in the morning, like 4, 3 a.m., the British officers storm into his house, beat him, humiliate him, and take him to prison or something. William Dalrymple talks about this in The Last Mughal. And Dr. Zaman also talks about the fact that the term Wahhabi had negative connotations. In fact, Nawab Sadiq Hasan Khan, the controversial, I say controversial because followers of Ahl Hadith right now in Pakistan, some of them
They
do
have
not
completely
consider.
different, exactly.
Yeah.
They don't have a sense of it.
So yeah, so
So maybe
controversial Hadith, Ahl Hadith scholar. He was jailed, by the way. In fact, Nazir Hussain Dehlavi, who's a great scholar of Hadith and the central figure of the Ahl Hadith, he was also jailed because of accusations of being a Wahhabi or something. And the last thing that I'll say is that Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan himself wrote that we are actually the descendants of Shah Waliullah. He did not say that we are inspired by Ibn Abdul Wahab. But he did write in support of Ibn Abdul Wahhab, Nawabzuddin Hasan Khan. But he did say that primarily speaking, we are the inheritors of the Shawwaliyullah tradition. But he also wrote a book on Wahhabiyat in which he said that, I mean, those ideas are fine.
I see many of those movements from a reactionary point of view, not an ingrained thing, right?
No,
The way they would adopt these things. One more
the,
point I forgot to mention, and I think maybe you will touch upon it later, is the fact that how there was another institution that came and that tried to sort of bring Aligarh, Deoband, to some extent, even early versions of Barelvi movements together. That was the Nadwatul Ulama. And they were almost, I mean, I wouldn't call it offshoot of Aligarh Muslim University, but they were deeply influenced by AMU. They were very
Yeah,
traditional from the Deoband school side of it, and
yeah.
they had
Sir
a
Syed
more
had,
approach of bringing everyone together. I wonder if
yeah,
you're going to
Sir Syed
capture
had a
that.
role. Sir Syed also had a role in establishing that thing.
Yeah.
I read. Yeah, so
so I think it's unfair to say that the British characterized the Tariq-e Muhammadiyya as Wahhabis. We had indigenous, so in Peshawar, the Mujaddidi uh, 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 figure, in Peshawar. If you could remind me at that time, Peshawari, what was the name of the figure?
Fazil Ahmed special.
Yes. So he was, I think, had a fatwa against and termed them Wahhabis. So this was an
No,
indigenous
it was
thing.
Fazl Ahmed Peshawari's son,
Yeah.
Fazl Haq. Fazl Haq's deputies, actually. They were the ones who
Ah,
wrote the.
okay, within the yes, yes, yes. So obviously they this accusation of Wahhabism is there amongst the
Yeah,
indigenous
it's there. I was
Muslims.
just mentioning like the term and meaning of Wahhabi in British worldview, British perspective. So it was anti-British
Yeah,
hostility, these things. So
yeah.
Abu Hurairah, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I just had a reflection more than a question, to be honest. We were discussing Sir Syed Ahmad Khan and his legacy, and I just wanted to put in a folk story regarding how he's remembered in India today, at least very colloquially speaking, and people I've interacted with. I remember having this discussion about his creed, for example, and this has happened multiple occasions. For whatever reasons, we were discussing those things. And whenever it's about, okay, how do we think of him? How do we remember him? There's always this story of, our Akabarin have had dreams of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan being put in Jannat. So there's no need for us to really worry about what his end outcome is, for example. So it's very interesting in terms of, I mean, there's an irony in the fact that perhaps one epistemic source that Sir Syed Ahmad Khan would not have fully approved is actually used to preserve a very positive cultural memory of him. I think that's very interesting, which is, a dream-based positive connotation about Sir Syed Ahmad Khan in at least the public imagination. Um, so to speak, and of course, I mean, and the fact of his legacy is kind of important in today's political scenario. So perhaps if there is any institutions that are still out there standing to represent the Muslims, AMU certainly is one of them, and it stands tall. And that says a lot about what his, outcome has been. But yeah, that's it for me.
Yeah, so I read the son-in-law of Maulana Qasim was also a teacher in Aligarh. He was teaching the Sunni students about Deen and general Dini knowledge. Um, now that you've asked this question, I'm going to share the exact page. And till then, anyone who wants to share something, please feel free.
Was he the first Muslim communitarian? Would you say?
So politically speaking, I mean, he had enough influence and I'm speaking politically because Sir Syed was politically active more than the Deoband or others. So in that sense, yeah, makes sense.
Mm. They also say that Aligarh Muslim University that was the germs of Muslim separatism, Pakistan movement, actually has its germs in that institution. Yes.
Yeah, and it's
There's a saying,
the
Pakistan.
separatism idea emerged. The
Uh,
separatism idea emerged when Muslims because of Sir Syed and the general, like, thanks to print, again, print plays a huge role in this. Print, the general, like the secular British rule that categorizes Muslims and Hindus
But
into legal category.
was he just a communitarian or also a separatist? Because separatist is a further extreme to communitarianism. And those who
Communitarianism,
say
he was a
those who say
communitarian in the sense that he
yeah,
wanted,
so
the British.
separatism is that the Hindus
He
and
was a
Muslims
communitarian.
Hindus and Muslims cannot live together. That's the separatist, right?
Yeah,
And there
so
was
he was a communitarian in a sense that he wanted to advocate for the. So he saw he was he was fearing British majority, sorry, Hindu majoritarianism as things were progressing, and so that's why he became a Muslim communitarian. But the separatism idea emerged when Muslim as a political community emerged, right? So Muslims being a religious community, that's different. But within that British context, when Muslims emerged as a political, they already became a legal community when the British codified them as Muslims and Hindus and Anglo-Mohammedan law for Muslims and the Hindu customary law for Hindus, etc. So we were already a legal community, but then we became a political community because of the electorates and these things. So because of this political community that emerged, then we saw the move for separatism. I'm going to share Syed Ahmed Khan.
Yeah, Shrirsha, I have a question linked to that, in fact. Do you reckon the new political conditions also led him to think in those terms? Uh, this new political reality of a somewhat of a semblance of a nation state, for example, um, and I mean, certain form of politics, as you mentioned already, democratic politics, wherein you have to compete to represent yourself with some other communities, which is unlike before Sir Ahmed Khan's. I mean, could that have also led him to uh, try to wrestle with a new terrain which is not previously encountered? I mean, so as much as I mean, is it? I'm just thinking to myself, is it really fair to say that it was just a phenomena which was intrinsic to him that he was thinking in those ways, or was it the arena which is operating that led him to think in those terms as well, just as much, by no means only by his own volition. Any
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think we cannot, I think it's hard to project things onto the future. I think if had Sir Syed lived long enough, I'm not sure what his ideas would have been as far as modern state is concerned. Because see, the question of Pakistan was, first of all, there were two ideas of Pakistan. One was something that, what was the name of that Cambridge student who came up with the idea, or who came up with the idea of Pakistan? And then there was this idea of Iqbal, right? And likewise, the geography was also.
Chaudhry Rahmat Ali.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Chaudhry Rahmat Ali. The geography was contested, right? So I guess he would have taken multiple things into consideration before saying something. So yeah, I mean, the question of Pakistan was, very vague. I mean, the political idea was clear that we need a state for Muslims, etc. But as far as its geography is concerned, as far as its constitution is concerned, that was totally vague. There was no semblance of anything. So anyway, I just wanted to show you this. Maulana Muhammad Akbar Khan, mentioned above, was first professor of Arabic and Sunni theology at Aligarh and managed the boarding house until his death in 1886. In 93, Maulana Muhammad Abdullah, Maulana Muhammad Qasim's son-in-law, joined the staff to supervise the religion of the Sunni boys. He was enjoined to preach on such subjects as the Prophet ﷺ, the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, the love of Allah, and the duties toward one's parents, etc. So yeah, so generally this is something that Qasim Zaman also talks about, is that early modernists were very close, like they were interacting with ulama. I mean, Maulana Qasim and Sir Syed having conversation. The conversation did get intense, yes, but that they ended on positive note. Likewise, I mean, this introduction. Likewise, I mean, generally speaking, we saw Sir Syed interacting with Haji Abdullah Makki, right? He was founder of Islamic modernism. Late Islamic modernism is completely hostile. You have in Pakistan, Khalifa Abdul Hakim, You have obviously Fazlur Rahman, and you have plenty other figures, Sohrawardi, the Bengali politician, and they're extremely hostile. So the divisions actually grow afterwards. So yes, Hussein.
So there's just one more element of Sir Syed's the influence on Sir Syed that I think we should also bear in mind is not only 1857, which was a watershed moment, but even around that time or even prior to that, he had deeply seen the influence and impact of Raja Ram Mohan Roy when it comes to the Brahmo Samaj. And he saw how there was a very different way of responding to the British. Now, this is in relation to how Sir Syed decided to respond to the British, how he thought the Muslim society or community needs to be reconstructed. I wouldn't call it necessarily reform at that time. This was reconstruction initially. Then it became how do you work with the British, and then it comes to reform and then modernization tendencies and all that stuff, right? If you were to chart these paths. Brahmo Samaj was highly influential. Brahmo Samaj, Rajaram Mohan Roy was someone who had, for the first time, taken the Hindu society community upped its game essentially on in terms of modernism, on in terms of scientific rationalism, coming up with removing these bhakti elements and cultural sensitivities towards a more rational way of it. And crucially, he was co-opting the Muslim society in Bengal a lot. So a lot of the Muslims were beginning to move in that direction. Sir Syed decided to think about, oh, hang on a second, you're losing a lot of Muslim community towards a different version of a pan-India Hindu movement, and then we are deeply affected by the English. So I would never classify him as a separatist, but he was definitely an exclusivist. He definitely was a communitarian. I've already mentioned that I consider that he would be happy to concede that he was elitist. It was more about how do you engage with the British? Can you engage with the British? Can you establish? I mean, his argument was that Muslims are the heritage or the legacy of governing in India. Governance of India cannot be without the Muslims. He wanted to ensure that that point is not forgotten. And so he knew that, of course, the Muslim society has been completely demolished and it was hollow, but he still wanted to make sure that they are involved in those things. Now, this communitarian tendency, you could think about it that it laid the seeds towards separatism that happened later, but he would not, I mean, nation state or nation building was not something that obsessed him. It was not something that was as a concept that sort of, I don't think he was wrestling with that, but he was wrestling on how the community is interacting with the British, how the community is interacting with the Hindus, how the community does it have even a legacy going forward? So that's my perspective on that.
Can I ask you, do you so was he mirroring within the Muslim community what Ramohan Roy, did you say?
So that's what I'm saying. He
Yeah.
was not exactly mirroring them, but he
Okay.
was influenced by them. And he was taking note of the reform movements that was going on in the Hindu society and community. To some extent, when it comes to modernization or scientific temperament or removal of customs and traditions, yes, you could say so. But the approaches were very different from Brahmo Samaj to whatever became of Sir Sayyid's movement.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
that
just
just
One big
one
difference,
thing, the
one big difference
influence
between the
as
Hindus and Muslims was that the Hindus were much more readily accepted modern education as compared, they were much more behind the Muslims, relatively speaking, the colonial period. So I think there was that obviously difference, in terms of education, obviously the mercantile class as well. That was the concentrate, within the, and one other thing, I think it was he mentioned that only the ashraf should be educated. The modern education should only be the ashraf, not the non-ashrafi, the elite Muslim. That's what I think. I don't know if you know if that statement is. I believe that he made that statement. Sayyid Ahmed Khan. Yes.
so another parallel of what Hussein mentioned as far as influence from a Hindu reformist or revivalist group is concerned, we find the same thing in Maulana Shah Ismail Delhi. So one of the important aspects of his revival project is, for example, the whole question of widow remarriage. So Hindu reformist groups, and I forgot the names of those groups. They're basically saying that, God is one, like they're presenting a monotheistic worldview, but they're also emphasizing on widow remarriage. So widow remarriage was considered to be a, huge problem for traditional Hindus. And likewise, it was a problem in Muslim society as well. And Maulana Shah Ismail Dehlvi, he takes this upon himself to basically bring this back. Um, you know, and so, and I think there's actually one point in his life where he breaks down and starts crying, and saying that, I used to remove pages of, so was Sahih Bukhari or Tirmidhi. He said I would remove those pages in which the widow remarriage was talked about, so that my sister could not hear it. But now I want my sister to remarry. So this is who. So the point is that Hindu revivalist or reformist groups were also an important point of reference for ulama as early as 1820s. 1820s, Shah Ismail Dehlvi is like, you know, he's young and he's also very energetic because he was a proper soldier, by the way. And he's doing his reform project, and he's taking cues, and he's influenced by the surrounding Hindu, revivalist groups as well. And imitating the Hindu, like that's a huge thing. Imitating the Hindu. Are we imitating, the mushrik, the Hindus? So that's also a important point. Now that the political, sovereignty is cracking, like it's almost going to come to an end. The focus is now shifting to society, the masses, the ahmal of people, the aqaid of people. And Shah Ismail is definitely the pioneer, like of Deoband and Ahmadiyya. So
Which Hindu group
likewise,
was
I'm also not surprised that this is the same situation with the Sayed.
which Hindu group was this?
I forgot the name. I think I'll have to check.
Okay.
But
I mean,
the
you had multiple Samaj going on at that time. You had the Arya and the Brahmo, and you had
Was
Swami
and they were
Vivekananda,
using
Swami
oh, sorry,
Dayanand,
Arya
several.
Samaj
they were using Persian
Arya
language
Samaj goes
to
that far.
propagate the.
I was thinking of Arya Samaj, but I thought that was after that period. No.
I know, of course, but the point is that there were lots of them coming up, especially with the emergence of Sikhism. You know, the Sikhs, when they started to get a lot of movement and political power, the first community that reacted to them more so than the Muslim community was the Hindu community, and that's when a lot of the revival they started coming up with their own revivals first. Muslims were in some form of regional power centers, right? So we were in some form of deep slumber at that time. The other communities were having their own elements. I mean, you can look for it and we can talk about that later. But at least that's what I wanted to mention. One interesting point that you were mentioning, and I really want to thank you, Shirsha, is I went back and I was able to properly read and finish defending Mohammedan modernity. The role and this very admirable role of Sheikh Imdadullah Muhajir Makki. What a remarkable person
Yeah.
was. And I mean, my estimation and admiration for him has kept on getting higher and higher with time. And he's often overlooked. And I'm glad that you, in the lecture today,
Yeah.
were able to bring and position him well. I think we need to see him really as a hero of pan India Islamic sense of bringing different peoples together. Certainly
Yes.
failed at that time, but his legacy is more valuable than the outcome in his lifetime.
Yeah, he's very similar to Shah Waliullah in the sense that he is revered and loved by everyone. Like,
Yeah,
you want to know him
amazing,
or you
amazing
can know
film,
him. And he tried
amazing.
to glue, like, he saw that the divisions or debates were increasing, and he tried
Mhm.
to basically glue everyone together, even though he was in Makkah at that time. But he's
Mhm.
writing to Maulana Rashid, he's writing to the Barelvi ulama like Maulana Sami and others. He's writing to them and, telling them. He wrote a book, Faisla the
Haft
Faisla.
Masla, Faisla
Yeah,
Haft Masla, FHM,
yeah,
as
exactly.
he calls it.
Then the book, he's basically saying that,
Yeah.
okay, maybe you guys should just calm down. Like after like
You got to
a good,
admire. You know, he tried.
yeah.
He really tried his best. Mm.
And the fact that he got respect from both the schools, I think I just couldn't believe it when I first read it. I was like, this
And
is,
he still communicated with modernists as well. That was
yeah.
a unique angle. You know, you don't
And he also fought
from a
in the
Sufi,
mutiny. Yes.
from an ulama, and then from a modernist background. That's a lot of different shades to somebody's life at that time
And
while
he
living
fought
in
the British.
Makkah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, racism. Was it less pronounced in the century before the 18th century? The Britishers, were they
Yeah,
less racist then?
before the 1830s, the British were very, you
Before
know,
the
very
Victorian period, you're saying the Victorian period.
Victorian era is a we can
That's when
skip
they
that one.
became
But before
racist
the
and
British officers and
puritanical.
priests before
Mm.
1830, they are
Yes,
very,
accommodating.
you can say they want to learn about the Islamic tradition. Shah Abdul Aziz had British officers as students. They would come to his madrasa and learn
Mm.
Persian from him, learn
Yes.
Arabic from him. And so this is the reason that Dalrymple has written a book, White Mughals. So White Mughals
Mm.
is a reference to those very sympathetic, officers who wanted to basically immerse themselves within this new world,
Mm.
this world that they have found home. But
It,
the people that come after 1830, like this British viceroy of Delhi, but he's like the British officer ruling over Delhi. This is like 1850s now, 1840s. He is very hostile to Mughal king, and he's also very hostile to the public in general. There's this new priest in town at this time who was also very hostile, and so this new generation of people who came to rule India, they were the ones who were becoming extremely hostile, and that was an issue that was creating division. So much so that someone like Mufti Sadruddin Azurda, who was historically, I mean, if you look at him, he had a very ambivalent attitude towards the British. He's not, anti or British or anything like that. This is
mm.
obviously before the mutiny happens. This is before the mutiny, and even he starts telling his students not to interact with the British or like go to their universities or colleges or Delhi College because the Christian priests had started their missionary, goals, and that was polluting the entire environment. Religious debates were happening, and so that led to a huge problem. So, as far as racism is concerned, that becomes more pronounced after the mutiny, when they realize that, okay, I mean, we have
Mm.
defeated every single Muslim power or like any power of the natives here. So yeah. So then the whole idea of, oh, these are inferior people, and we are the white. It's the white man's burden. Like those
But
things.
but but don't you think the germs were there before? Because the fact that the mutiny happened was maybe a response to the racism.
Yeah,
You know?
1830s, right? So
Yeah, exactly. Yes,
after
yeah, yeah.
1830s, we see a rise in
Mm.
new rulers, also a rise in priests who are
Yeah.
coming to Delhi and they're creating chaos. Yes, Abu
And
Hurairah.
also the 1830s was when the Britishers they decided Urdu replaces Persian. A, a, a,
Yeah,
a
1831.
momentum,
Yeah.
a momentous, move, decision. Yes, we lost after that. Gradually, we lose. But when Persian was the lingua franca, the educated class, we were to lose that, through the decades, that were to, yeah.
Yeah. Yes,
What
Abdullah.
what was his contribution to Urdu?
Let's give a chance to Abu Hurairah and then we can.
Sorry, just one other question. What was his contribution to Urdu? Um, could you mentioned he was very important to Urdu.
Yeah,
What
he
is
translated works. He translated Western works into Urdu, and that turned Urdu into prose language from a language of poetry. It was used as a language of poetry first, but then into a language of prose.
did he uh purify the Urdu language of Sanskritic words, or no, not? I mean, I'm not sure whether he
I don't
was. Huh?
know about that. I have no idea about that, but he
And
definitely
and, and
turned
did,
it into
and
prose
did he
language.
try to identify Urdu with Islam? The Muslims. Or was he?
Yeah, I mean
Um,
Urdu generally. Yeah,
no, Urdu. Well,
yeah.
it
Urdu
wasn't.
generally was becoming a language of the new lingua franca of Muslims with the rise in print. And then with the Hindu revivalist movements focusing on Sanskrit,
Hindi,
that
Hindi, Sanskrit, Hindi,
yeah, Hindi, sorry. So that
which is
creates a
Sanskritized. Yeah. Yes.
yes, Abu
Yeah,
Hurairah.
yeah. My question is perhaps a little out of topic for now, but I'm curious in terms of what are the parallel experiences of Muslims across different areas beyond the subcontinent, right? I think what's happening in Egypt, um, what's happening in Turkey, because I did read briefly, for example, that the Turkish response to I mean, some of the Muslims' response was to also create a new kalam theology in the modern era, for example. And slightly away from that region, if you come to Egypt, there are different responses to this moment, in a way. So I was very curious in terms of if there's going to be any comparative work to see the varied responses of Muslim. And because, I mean, I'm assuming that experiences are very different. The Turkish experience maybe is slightly different than the Indian experience. But I'm curious if there's any comparison between these areas.
So Syed is definitely at the top. He's at the top. I mean, he's the earliest guy who's writing in this reformist. Like 1878 was the year he published his commentary on the Bible, and he's also publishing books on, his naturalistic understanding. Basically, his entire Kalam Jadid. Abdu is the student of Jamaluddin Afghani. Jamaluddin Afghani had a heated exchange with Sir Syed. He called him a naturey and among other things. And interestingly enough, by the way, the works of Sir Syed are less read. I mean, as far as theological ideas is concerned, they're less read in India than other parts of the world. So in the broader Muslim world, in Egypt or these areas, his works were read more than they were read in India. The only theological work of his which were read was the response that he wrote to William Moyer. So we see the reception of his ideas abroad. But I think as far as like this new intelligentsia is concerned, Syed is definitely like way early than Abdu or others. So yeah, I mean, a comparative study would be interesting, I guess, to see. Yes, Hussein.
No, I think you hit a raw nerve for me because I really enjoy this particular topic. Looking at a post-Ottoman era, post-Mughal era, post-Safavid era, with a lot of interest. I would just say, because we don't have time, I would just encourage you to look at Islamic Enlightenment by Christopher Garage. I met him earlier this year at the Jaipur Literature Festival. I had my issues with him, but he's a very good chap to engage. He's a bit set in his ways from a very French perspective. He talks about, of course, Ottoman Egypt and Iranian experiences. So you'll find a lot of interest there, but I mean, you could go on and on for hours on the subject. But that's, I mean, because we don't have the time, but I'll refer that to you. And if there's anything else, we'll talk about
A lot of people suggested that book to me, but I don't know, I was a bit. I saw this.
Well, I mean,
The author is a journalist.
Read it from a, when you read a book like this, you're not reading necessarily for as a text. You're reading it as a opinion piece, as an interesting opinion piece. And it's always good to read people who you know that you're going to disagree with. And if you go with that perspective, there's a lot of value, by the way. There's a lot of characters that he comes up with, especially from the Egypt side, which I was totally not aware of. So yeah, I mean, it has its value, but yes, it's a more, you have to have a lot of patience when you read works like this.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. This is one of the reasons that I just thought that maybe I should give it a read, but it's just that first is the credentials. I have a hard time reading a book like that. Number two, the terminologies that he uses is just something that I cannot, accept. Enlightenment, like what does that mean? So by saying Muslim enlightenment, as if so understanding Muslim history the same way that the European history is usually understood, like ancient, the age of antiquity, the Middle Age, and then you have the Middle Ages, and then you have the Age of Enlightenment. The antiquity was a golden age, and then we have the dark age, and then we have the enlightenment age, right? And so likewise, by saying the Islamic enlightenment, he's saying that, okay, Muslims were in the dark ages, this is the middle age, and now it's the enlightenment. And where is this enlightenment coming from? Oh, it's the Western influences. So I think it's that ontology, like there's already an end goal towards this entire study is going. So that just really, but your point stands.
But although he has one interesting angle is the fact that you cannot enforce upon a community enlightenment which is not inherent and organic to them. So his point is that Islamic societies or Muslim societies especially these three big post-empire societies, they developed their own notions of enlightenment, which in some cases were successful, in other cases were not so successful. And what were the factors when it comes to that? Now, we may disagree with the whole notion of enlightenment, but
Yeah.
he is not one of those neocon hacks that we will force you to be free and you have to go and do these things, and you are coming from. He's not a Bernard Haeckel or Sam Huntington. He's a very different fellow, and you can debate with him. He's very open to talk about it. He's very French, very direct. I enjoyed it, to be honest with you. But I have my issues with the Enlightenment part of it, but at least he documented inherent organic movements in the Muslim traditions, which I don't think many people have done that, to be honest with you.
Have you read Culture of Ambiguity?
No, I don't recall that actually.
Thomas Bauer is a German scholar. Yeah, that would be, I think, somewhat related. But thank you for that book recommendation. I'll look into that.
No, it's not a recommendation without concerns, right? So, but yes, yeah.
With
So read it
reservation,
with handle with care.
of course.
Have you has anyone read Ibrahim Lughat's book, The Arab Rediscovery of Europe?
Sorry?
Arab Rediscovery of Europe.
No.
It's an interesting book.
Okay.
Again, there are issues, but it's basically about the first Egyptian travelers who go to France and England and these areas, and their experiences. They came back with like new ideas of education, etc. Interestingly enough, there's also an Indian aristocrat who goes to Europe. I think he was the first one. In my conversation with Dr. Asad yesterday, we were having this conversation, and he mentioned someone that there was this Indian aristocrat who went to Europe. I was like, "Are you talking about Ali Mirza?" His name was Abu Talib Ali Mirza. He passed away in 1805. I think he was a Shia, as far as I don't think he was a Sunni. But he goes to England, he spends like 5 years there. So he goes in 1798 and he comes back in 1803. He passes away 2 years later. And so he has a very interesting take, by the way. And Shah Abdul Aziz book, the biography of Shah Abdul Aziz, Dr. Syed Atar Abbas Rizvi has quoted him at length. So there's this long quote, and he's explaining why the Muslim India, for example, cannot be basically reformed. And by reform, I mean that adopt modern system or modern worldview, or like modern institutions like technology. And the reason that he says this, so the reasons that he presents is that, number one, the people are either completely ignorant, like they're not educated. Like you need an educated class, right, to have to have a educated class, then you can do development works and these things. We don't have compulsory education, or he really admires the British education system, the fact that the schools everywhere, everyone is women are educated, right, to a higher level. So he admires that. And then he's like, I mean, fine, I want Muslims also to reach that level, but we're just not. Like, look, there are no schools here. How can we have a technology? How can we run it? And he praises other things. So he's very pessimistic by the end of his life. Likewise, Rifat al-Tahtawi, I think that was his name, the Egyptian traveler who
Yes,
goes to.
so that's what Christopher uses him actually a lot. Rifat Tata, and I think he basically picks 3-4 characters from each place, and he talks about their interaction with the Europeans, with the Western notions, and how they documented and wrote about those things. But yeah, he was a very interesting character.
Yeah, so that was the book that I have read, in which there are ideas about adopting modern institutions in the Muslim world happening as early as like right after Napoleon's invasion of Egypt in 1799, I guess. So 1810, 1820s, definitely 1820s. So
Have you looked into decolonization and Islamic studies? No. Okay. This is
what
not
is
a book. Just generally,
Oh,
this decolonization. This is in vogue nowadays. So I just was wondering whether you.
yeah, I don't read decolonial studies, and I mean, I guess I did read a few, but I don't study it anymore.
Sure.
I
I've more
also,
dabbled in decolonization in Indian context, in South African context, and in North African context, but not necessarily decolonization in Muslim context.
Okay. Yeah. Can I ask you one last just I know you said you won't do a lecture because the reading material is scanty, when it comes to Ahl Hadith and Nadwa. But have you looked into the connection doctrinally, the Ahl Hadith, those figures, mainly Punjabi phenomenon, it seems, the ones you mentioned on WhatsApp, and the Tariqate Muhammadiyya, right? That's the if I said the name
Shah
correctly.
Ismail Dehlavi and
Yes, yes. Are they very similar, or are there differences between the two?
I mean, Maulana Syed Ahmed Bareilly and Maulana Shah Ismail Dehlavi, they are the they are the pioneers, and they are like the intellectual pioneers for
Okay.
Deoband and Ahl Hadith. Like they are part of the. I'm not is yeah yeah, both of them are. Shah Ismail is definitely a central figure because he was the one who got into the debates with Fazl Kharabadi
Mm.
and others. So yeah, I mean without a doubt. Maulana Rashid wrote about
So
defending Muhammad's mind.
the Wahhabi figures in 1857, Dalrymple also mentions were they self-consciously so there seems to be a tension there as well, in that period. So that you had the mention of the Wahhabi figure. So were they I mean, who were they followers of?
Which Wahhabi?
In the 1857 mutiny in Delhi, the where you had those faction, the Wahhabi faction.
There was no Wahhabi faction.
Okay, all right. Okay, I see.
It was after the defeat. What I mentioned earlier was that after the defeat of the
Dalrymple
Tariq-e-Muhammadiyya
mentions
movement,
that, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, there was a suspicion. There was a growing suspicion that another Tariq-e-Muhammadiyya would emerge in Delhi, and this time it would be against the British. And so they were, really worried, the British. So they send their spies in the streets and everywhere. They're trying to find a clue and trying to gather intel reports. And they get the report that there is this one scholar in Delhi and he's going to do something. He's very hostile to the British. He's preaching in mosque or something. Like they collect these reports and eyewitnesses. Some local guy would have said something. Okay, yeah, I actually confirmed this. He did say this. And so in the middle of the night, like I said, early in the morning, they barge into his house and they arrest him. So yeah, I just mentioned that because the term was considered to be anti-British, hostility towards the British,
Mm.
fanaticism, and this was the reason that it was on charges on being a Wahhabi that Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan and Maulana Nazir Hussain Dehlavi, so they were arrested and later
Mm.
released too. Maulana Nazir Hussain Dehlavi was also awarded Shamsul Ulama after that. I don't know if he accepted that. Most likely he did, but this was after he was released from prison. Abdul Haq Khairabadi was also awarded Shamsul Ulama by the British. He accepted that. And other than that, uh, there was a Deoband scholar that I know, but I forgot his name. I think Maulana Sadat mentioned it in his Telegram channel.
Okay.
It was I think I asked him a question about generally speaking, like the Deoband orientation, like any information if you could share with me with regards to like Deoband's orientation towards the British rule.
Mm.
Even though I read on it, but I wanted his opinion. So yeah, it was a lengthy. I think he shared a lot of excerpts from primary sources, and there was one scholar who was awarded Shamsul Ulama, but my mind is blinking. I totally forgot. But
Mm.
yeah, it's
Yeah, I have one more, but I think it will be better for tomorrow, the question, because I was just wondering where Barbara Metcalf, she gets this idea, the Ahl al-Quran come from the Ahl Hadith.
that's wrong. That's really wrong. I used to believe that too. Now I've seen
Where did she
two
get that
books
from?
that say that this is not true.
No, where did she get that from?
I think it's a general idea, something that was widespread in academia. There's another scholar too, Dr. Brown, who wrote the same thing. But it's not true. I mean, the
Jonathan,
book which is
Jonathan
on
Brown.
Ahl Quran movement says that they find the root in Sir Syed. Sir Syed's thought and his criticism of the Isnad paradigm, his his criticism of the Isnad paradigm and general Hadith studies, and then his associates obviously take like 2, 3 steps ahead, uh, and then the Ahl Quran find a precedent actually in these type of criticism. Like so, for the very first time, right? An Urdu book is available in which the Isnad are criticized, and that's thanks to
Mm.
Sir. And so that later gives precedent to Ahl Quran, and Ahl Quran obviously has one scholar, Chakralvi, Abdullah Chakralvi, and he's a student of Nazir Hussain Delvi and an associate of Maulana Batalvi. Um, and Maulana Batalvi and Chakralvi almost got into a heated debate, which would have turned into a physical fight between the supporters, but the British intervened.
Mm.
So yeah, the two. It's a wrong idea that it's a splinter group. Barbara Metcalfe has dedicated one page to Ahl Quran and its origins, whereas there's this entire book on it, which talks about the no, there's it's just not true.
Mm.
So, and also she doesn't mention any references, any primary references. She just says that.
No, yeah.
Whereas the book, obviously, it goes into detail, like the beginnings, the origins, the time when Chakralvi was thrown out of a mosque, of the Al Hadith mosque, where he, I think, said something regarding a hadith or something, so he was not allowed to pray. So yeah, it's a complex history. It's not that easy.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll meet tomorrow for that lecture in Ahl Quran. That'll be interesting.
Yeah, inshallah, we'll have a session on Ahl Quran, and I'll explain their beginnings and other ideas. Okay, so
Thank you for that.
I will end the session here. Okay, so thank you for joining. I hope you learned a few things. So